Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Tracey Devlyn, and I'm here with author Terrence McCauley to talk about his new historical thriller, The Twilight Town. Welcome to the show, Terrence.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is great.
I'm so happy to have you here. I know you've got a great background of all your books there. Can you point us to The Twilight Town so folks can see the cover there?
And yeah, it's right here.
There it
It's
is.
right up in the corner, right next to Chicago 63. There's the Twilight Town here. If I show the physical copy of the book, it'll screw up the background. So I figured this way it's easier.
Yeah, no, that's great. It looks very nice back there. Thank you for that. So, how does it feel being on the other side of the mic?
I love it. I mean, it's when I'm doing my own show, it's the writer that I have on as a guest often interviews me too. So I always prefer to have a dialogue back and forth. It's not just about the book that they're talking about now, but it's also about their career as a writer and how they got to this very strange craft of ours where we listen to the voices in our head and try to make sense of them for the audience. And
Yeah.
so it's been great. I mean, the podcasting is something I didn't think I was going to do, but then when Pam gave me the idea and the opportunity, I took it because it was just absolutely it opened my world to so many writers that I'd known for a long time, but didn't necessarily know and have a chance to speak to. So it's been really great so far.
Yeah, no, Pam's great. The network is great. I'm very happy I am tagging along as well. And for those of you who aren't aware, Terrence is the host of the amazing podcast Spies, Lies, and Private Eyes.
That's correct.
So be sure and go check it out. He's had some amazing guests, and I'm sure he'll have more amazing coming up here.
Thank you.
So, The Twilight Town is the second story that you've written with President Kennedy kind of in the backdrop there, the
Uh,
first being Chicago 63. If
mhm.
I were JFK, I'd suspect you didn't like me too much.
Well, you know what? It's funny as you delve into history and especially a complex presidency like his, it was amazing the amount of people he made enemies of in such a short amount of time in office. Um, and as I've gotten to know him, I'm a political scientist by training and by trade. I worked in New York State government for 25 years. So I appreciate the challenges that he had. And by looking at what he was able to accomplish in such a short amount of time was truly remarkable. And his candidacy and his ultimate presidency marked a shift in the country from the post-World War II leadership that Eisenhower had to people in the electorate who wanted a lot more change in the world.
Mhm.
And that reflected in the results of 1960 and Kennedy's ultimate election in 1961. Also, looking back at that time in history, I see that it wasn't much different in 63 as it was to today's times, too. There was
Mm.
constant, we kind of look back at that time and we see the black and white documentaries and the photographs, and we see Kennedy as an elegant young man with a beautiful family. And we think, well, he must have had a charmed presidency, but nothing was further from the truth. He had a lot of challenges that he had to face in the weeks and months and years before this story picks up. He had the Cuban Missile Crisis. He had the Bay of Pigs invasion. That was an embarrassment. He was constantly being pressured to stop communism spreading throughout the world. And then today, we also have social unrest. We have unrest throughout the world. And we have people who are clamoring for change. So
Mhm.
I think that that era was a lot different than ours. But in my research and doing the deep dive into historical fiction, I've seen that the more things change, the more they tend to stay the same.
Yeah, and it does feel sometimes how history can be very cyclical, almost like fashion. It comes around and it comes around and it almost makes me feel sometimes that we're not really learning from our past mistakes.
Right.
So that's but we can get into that a little bit more. But before before we learn more about JFK and all of that, why don't you tell us just a little bit more about yourself and your writing journey. What brought you to this moment?
Sure. Well, I graduated college with a political science degree, and like I mentioned earlier, I got a job in New York State government and was there for a very long time. I worked in economic development, I worked in transportation, and I worked in housing. So I got to see a broad breadth of what government can do for people. And
Mhm.
it's like Kennedy said, don't ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So I was strictly New York State, but I got to see a lot of how government worked and how people interact with each other at a very high level where the stakes literally do change people's everyday lives. I always had the writing bug, even as a kid, and I wanted to be able to tell stories and that I thought would entertain people, but also help me make sense of the world that has happened and that is happening around us. So I when I got my job in government, I started taking writing classes after work, the place called the Gotham Writers Workshop in New York
Mm.
City.
Yeah.
And that helped me understand the idea of it's not good enough to have an idea, but you have to know how to relate it in a story. And you have to be able to build tension, build scenes, and interesting characters that are going to grab the reader. So I had written a couple of novels that I had sent out. They didn't get published. And then in 2008, there was a friend of mine who got a cup of coffee and on the sleeve of the coffee was an advertisement for True TV's Search for the Next Great Crime Writer contest. So, out of the blue, she told me about it. I had one of my manuscripts ready to go, and I submitted it. I figured, what could I lose? It was free, and the upside was tremendous. Turns out, after several rounds, I wound up winning that contest.
Ah,
And it was
okay.
for Prohibition. That is my 1930
Mm.
novel that's been out for a long time. So when I had that kind of validation right off the bat, I was immediately hooked. And I knew that was something that I wanted to do in addition to continuing my career in New York State government. So ever since then, I've had the good pleasure of being published in three different types of genres: crime fiction, thrillers that are set in the modern day, and also historical fiction. A lot of those have been Westerns, which was an interesting choice for a guy who grew up in the Bronx and has the kind of accent I have. Didn't ride a horse till I was 30 or so. But it helped me understand that no matter what the genre is, it at its heart, a good book has to be about a good story with compelling characters. Those characters aren't necessarily white hats or black hats. Most of the people I write about have gray hats. And
Mhm.
that's reflected in all of my work and especially in the Twilight Town.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that because some of the characters in Twilight Town, on the surface, they look like, as you're using the term, white hats, and but they're just very, very layered and complex characters, all of them, and you really revealed how flawed, flawed that we're just flawed humans in general, right? And we have our own ambitions, and obviously in the thriller world, many people have heard, you're the hero of your own story, that sort of thing. And that really came out in Twilight Town. And I was going to ask you about that a little bit later, but we could do that now. I'm always very cautious of spoilers, so I do always ask the authors to just give us a quick overview of the book. And then following that, if you wouldn't mind, is maybe talk to us about how you wrote those characters. Did they reveal themselves to you as you wrote the story, or did you carefully map out their paths? So, yeah.
Sure, sure. I mean, well, the Twilight Town is set in 1963 Dallas. That's why the trilogy is called the Dallas 63 novel. So each of the novels is going to take a different look at the broader assassination. I've always been interested in conspiracy theories, even though I don't believe most of them, but I've always been fascinated by people's fascination with them. And I've looked into UFOs, Bigfoot, ancient aliens, all of that stuff. And I was always able to come to a logical conclusion that Bigfoot probably is bears walking around on their hind legs more than we think they do. They tend to do that. Ancient aliens, I think people got around in boats better than we thought they did, from one continent to another. And, the UFOs, most of those have been proven to be technology that in later years came to light. But the Kennedy assassination is different in that you've got people who focus on Dealey Plaza, and they'll focus on a lot of the events that happened on November 22nd, 1963. For me, I was more interested in the broader story about how it affected Dallas itself, because that's something that people haven't really covered before. So for me, when I was moved to write about the assassination, I said, I'm going to do this from the perspective of 3 Dallas police officers. So for the Twilight Town, it starts in February of 1963, and it goes all the way through the assassination on November 22nd, 1963. Along that line, we get to meet 3 cops who I say are corrupt, and they all wind up being corrupt, but for different reasons. The first one is Dan Wilson, who is with Dallas PD's Criminal Investigation Unit. That's kind of like their Secret Service, if you will, their FBI. They have a broad remit, and he is investigating corruption in the Dallas PD for the FBI. So he's doing a background investigation for them, and nobody knows he's doing it except one person and the FBI. He figures that that's going to catapult his career, and he becomes corrupted by that ambition. No spoilers. Then there's his former partner when he was in patrol, J.D. Tippit. Tippit was an actual police officer who was killed on November 22nd, 1963, several minutes after Kennedy was killed. A lot of people say Oswald killed him. In my book, and based on my research, I don't think he did. But again, you read the story and you'll understand why. And the third one was another fictional character called Harry Denton, who's an amalgam of a lot of different Dallas PD officers who were loosely involved, in my view, in the Kennedy assassination. Because Dallas PD had an awful lot of problems back then. They were under investigation for corruption. So rather than trying to fit a bunch of different police officers in that mold, I used one to tell a more streamlined story, because as you can imagine, any story about the Kennedy assassination is pretty involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so to answer your second question, when I was writing this, I had one idea, and that was going to be to tell it just from Wilson's perspective. But as I got writing it, I realized there's too much going on to funnel everything through one character. So that's when I said, you know what? Let me write it from Tippett's perspective. Let me write from Denton's perspective. And they, all 3 of them, and Wilson too, they all have a view of each other. And that helps show the audience exactly what is going on here without having to worry about keeping track of everything. I tried to fold in historically accurate events and some that I uncovered through my research into the broader story as it unfolds.
So the POV expanded while you were writing, or did you realize that right away before you got too far into the story?
Yeah, I wrote the first few chapters, and I kept saying, I need a little bit more variety here. And I already had done a lot of research about Tippit. Again, Wilson and Denton are amalgams of a lot of different police officers. And I said, you know what? It would be great. I love Wilson and he's a cool character, but a story this big can't go through just one POV. So I broadened it. And that not only, I think, made it a better book to read, but it was also a more entertaining book to write, because each of these characters, while they've been corrupted in some way, they all have their different motivations. And rather than having that told from one person's perspective, I'm able to tell it from the 2 other principal characters. And that really helped me fall in love with the story.
Yeah, I'm one of those readers where I always like to know what's going on in in the other person's head. So
Right.
I enjoy multiple POVs. I can enjoy a single POV too, but I just feel like it's sometimes a richer experience for me as a reader to hear what's going on to other people's heads.
Yeah, and me too, because it's funny when I started, I didn't grow up as a kid who had his nose in a book all the time, but when I was in college, I really got into reading for pleasure. So I read James Clavell's Taipan, and if you want to talk about somebody who was able to tell a compelling story, but from multiple points of view, even though I didn't know I'd be a writer at the time, I was impressed by that. And when this book came up, I said, you know what, maybe I'm going to take my hand at that. And
Yeah.
that's how the format of the Twilight Town came to be.
Nice, nice. Well, I was going to say that if you ever want to immerse yourself in Bigfoot fandom, there's a town not too far away from me who has a Bigfoot festival every year, and you can get Bigfooted to your heart's content for sure.
Yeah, it's become a cottage industry. It really
Oh my
has.
gosh, it's so fun. Um, well, you've written a number of historical novels from the 1800s westerns, like you mentioned, to 1930s prohibition, and now the 1960s. Can you identify what draws you to this, like what I call a subgenre of the suspense and crime fiction genre? What do you why do you keep going back to historical, do you think?
I think it's because I've always loved history and I love reading about people that came before us and what their motivations were. And when the first foray I had into historical fiction was 1930s New York, which allowed me to delve into my love of New York, New York's history, and New York's colorful political history as well.
Mm.
And and since I had worked in government, I was really interested in that. And so the more I dug into it, the more I understood that, let's say, the classic films that Jimmy Cagney and Edward G. Robinson did, they weren't necessarily accurate because they had to satisfy censors. They had to ultimately, the good guy had to win and the bad guy had to
Mm.
die at the end. But they did serve a purpose in that it interested me enough in that era to do the research. And the more I did, the more I couldn't believe what people got away with back then. And so a lot of that worked its way into my 1930s and Charlie Doherty mysteries. Uh, then after that, I had the opportunity to write Westerns. And when I delved into that genre and that era, I realized that it wasn't necessarily what we've seen in the movies and the different books we've read, because the Western genre in particular usually forms itself to the time in which it's being told. Like in the 1940s and 50s, they were usually patriotic Westerns where the good guy always won and got the girl, and the bad guy went to jail or died. In the research I did into that era, it was completely different. It wasn't like we see in movies where there was the shootout at high noon on Main Street. Nobody did that. They were mostly bar brawls that, people shot each other from 10 feet away and they were violent and bloody affairs. But there was also sickness involved. There was
Mm.
everything that you had to take into consideration. If you were going one town over, you had to make sure your horse was in good condition, that you had feed for them, that you knew where you were going to sleep that night, where the watering holes were. It opened my eyes to understanding that that era in our history was more complex than we might think. And there was also political involvement back then too. So all of that I learned from the 1930s helped me write the 1880s fiction with a certain lens. And then when I was
Nice.
doing this Kennedy saga, I realized that, as I said earlier, that a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with today were also issues back then. So it's been great to explore several different times in our history and see how they each contributed to making us the country we are today, for good or bad.
Yeah, yeah. And it seems to me that it might be a little bit of a palate cleanser too, moving around even, some folks move from genre to genre, not just within the same genre, so it kind of maybe reignites your creativity a little bit whenever you have to, if you're like me, and it sounds like you are, where you love to do research and learn about new eras and technologies and way people lived and all of those types of things. I could see how that would be a fun kind of side effect of moving from different eras.
Right, yeah, and it's funny that you use the term palate cleanser because I use that quite a bit when I'm talking to people who've crossed genres. And I find there's something rewarding for me as a writer in each and every one. It helps keep me uh, thinking about new ideas for plots, and also keeps me honest because I don't want to fall into a rut. Also, when doing enough research, you know where the rabbit holes are. And it's very dangerous to get lost down one. And especially the JFK assassination, there were tons of rabbit holes everywhere you look. And there were people who dedicated decades of their lives to exploring them. So it's good to know that they're there. And sometimes, and I've gone down plenty of them, but then it's always with that writer's mind where no, I have to make something of this. This was fun. And if it doesn't serve the story, then I gotta unfortunately cut it.
Yeah, yeah, and then those can be tough to do. Cut it off and move on for sure.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
let's switch gears just a little bit. Go behind the scenes, to the man behind the books. Is there a story that you would love to write, but maybe you just haven't taken the plunge yet for whatever reason? I know you're in the midst of a trilogy here, but is there something out there that you haven't pulled the trigger on yet?
Yeah, there were a couple of horror stories that I have in mind that I know are going to be immersive because they're they're not told in the modern day, and I want to respect the era in which I'm writing, and I don't
Yeah.
want it to be pastiche. I also know that it is not going to be the next great American novel, but I don't want to fall into that trap of people are expecting what is going to happen next.
Hmm.
So it's an incredibly complex story that I know is going to take a lot of my time and a lot of my effort. But after writing this trilogy, I'm halfway through the second book now, no, three-quarters of the way through the second book now. I feel confident that I can pull a lot of that together. And even if it doesn't find a home, at least I know it'll be as good as I can make it. So,
Yeah.
because I think horror is one of those things that if it's done well, it can really relate to people. And like Stephen King does, he doesn't just write about ghouls and goblins. I think he's been successful because he writes about characters that people can relate to and in situations
Yeah.
that we relate
Yeah.
to. And I think that, in the years to come, I think his genius won't be recognized until way back then. He's very popular, he's very wealthy, and people say he's talented, but there's a lot more there to his books than people realize.
Yeah, yeah. There's new terms that are being thrown around about horror. Well, I don't know if they're new. They're a couple of years old now, maybe, but like literary horror or elevated horror and things like that. So they're hitting their heyday here, I think.
Yeah.
So no, that's I agree with you about Stephen King. He it's almost like he keeps reinventing himself, but he's still writing along similar lines in a way too. I think somebody needs to write a historical fiction about him that's, like near near history or near historical or whatever the term would be. I don't know, but I would love to read a book about how he does it, how he stays so relevant for so many decades, really.
Right. Yeah. And there's a lot of other sources of fiction that I enjoy reading too. I just watched Brideshead Revisited on BBC on BritBox, and that was a fascinating story that was written in 1939 or the early 40s about it was a contemporary story at the time, but it relates today because it was so layered with rich characters and rich setting, but it had a fundamental message to it. And I think whatever genre we're writing in, that's what we should always strive for. That
Hmm.
should be a common thread that we have a message that we want to say, and try to convey that in as entertaining a way as possible.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So what is your favorite thing that you like to do when you finish a book? How do you celebrate or how do you treat yourself?
I will usually take a couple of days off and watch, either play a little golf or step away from the keyboard and watch some documentaries that are related to what I'm working on now or maybe looking at in the future. Because again, that palette cleanser idea is very important. And also too, I write a lot during the day, and at the end of a book, my hands are kind of sore too, and my brain is kind of jello-y. So I need to unplug for a little bit and then go back and go through the editing process, which I happen to enjoy. I don't like summaries. I hate writing summaries of my stuff. Those are
Yeah,
they're necessary, but I don't. It's not my favorite thing to do.
yeah,
But the editing process is something that I really enjoy, and again, knowing how to strike the right balance with that is important. If you cut too much, you might ruin the story. If you leave too much in, you can ruin it too.
right.
There's a German expression that I still can't pronounce, but an artist taught me about. It's a German expression that says you can ruin something by trying to make it perfect.
Mm.
I wish I knew. I always ask people if they know what that is, and they never can. Nobody has heard of it, but it seems like it would be a good German expression too, by turning it too perfect and ruining things. So yeah, that's what I try to do. I try to do something that's completely separate for a couple of days. But as you know, you're always writing. You're always thinking about something. The
Yeah.
craft never leaves us alone, nor do we want it to.
No, no. But I'm glad you're doing at least something to celebrate because it's such a big accomplishment when you finish a book. So I'm glad you're doing a little bit something for yourself. That's great.
Sure.
Can you tell us about a recent book that you've read and loved and maybe why?
Okay. One of the books that I just finished reading was actually Brideshead Revisited.
Okay.
And it was, I read the book and then I watched the movie. And I enjoyed it because even though it's from a completely different era than where we are now, it, the complexity of the characters and the plot development are absolutely fantastic. And it's really, it was interesting to see how people lived back then, and especially the protagonist's view of the world he was a part of, but never in, and how at the end of the book he realizes that he never was. So that's that kind of journey, I think, is something that can translate well into a lot of different genres. It doesn't necessarily have to be a period piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that one was great. Also, The Great Man, which was done by Ms. Lurie. Fantastic book. Kayla Lurie. She's going to be somebody who's going to be on our scene for a very long time.
Yeah.
I think that was another fantastic book that's been compared to the Great Gatsby era, but I think
Oh,
there's a lot more going on there than people might think. And that was another one I really enjoyed too. I
right.
enjoy books
Okay.
where they take a little bit of a twist that you don't necessarily expect, and but they don't go so far as to strain credulity, and
Yeah.
instead it broadens horizons. And I think that's what good fiction should do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, before we go, can you tell us what you're working on next? Obviously, you said you're about three-quarters of the way through book two. Are you doing any other projects that you can talk about, or are you focused on this trilogy right now?
Sure. For me, I am three-quarters of the way through the sequel. This one is either going to be called Ring of Fire or Tears on a River. And it is about Dan Wilson's plight to help Oswald from the time he's arrested in the Texas theater on November 22nd after the assassination, all the way through to when Jack Ruby kills him in the parking garage of police headquarters. So it's about him trying to do what he can to save Oswald, who has a lot of valuable information that's going to validate a lot of his work.
Yeah,
So
great.
no spoilers. We all know how the
Yeah.
story ends, but still, that's what it. So that's a very tight time frame. Whereas Twilight Town goes from February or November. This is about 3 days, and it's a
Okay.
pace. And then the third one after that, I don't have the title for it yet, but that'll be also at the tail end of trying to find the killers of JFK. So it's I've got a lot of great journey left in me with this group, and I'm looking forward to it.
And do you have an expected release date for book two yet, or not yet?
Probably this time next year, maybe a little bit
Okay.
earlier. Like I said, I'm two-thirds of the way in, and I don't even have a title picked yet, but I'm definitely going to, that'll reveal itself as I finish the book. And that's always another great idea too, is when you finish the book, you got to come up with a title for it, and sometimes that title changes.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. All right, folks. Well, when this episode airs, The Twilight Town will be out, so be sure and order your copy today. You can check out Terrence's website at terrencemccauley.com. Terrence, what social media platform are you most active on?
I'm most active on Facebook. I do post a lot to Twitter and Instagram, but for my generation, nobody's going to click on me for selfies or videos or anything like that. And I'm not really that much into media anyway. But Facebook is where I'm very active. I'll post some stuff that pops into my head or interesting things that I come across on there. But I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads as well. And my
Okay.
podcast is available anywhere people get podcasts, just like yours. So, checking out terrencemccauley.com is always a great way to figure out what I'm doing next.
Okay. And then your handle on Facebook, is it Terrence P. McCauley? Did I get that right?
Yes, it is. And
Okay.
I also have a writer's page too. So I
Okay.
post on one and the other as well.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thanks a ton, Terrence. It was an absolute pleasure to finally meet you face to face, albeit virtually, but we'll take what we can get, right?
Yeah, it was great meeting you, and thank you for having me on the show. It's been great.
You bet. Many thanks to everyone listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'll be back soon with another great read.